Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. You know, normally when I come to do one of these videos, I don't actually know what the title's going to be until well after I've already watched the battle and recorded the video. And then I spend a couple of minutes trying to think of something appropriate, but let's just say by about halfway through this particular battle, I already knew what this video was going to be called. And it's not a reference to the energy drink, by the way. It's red as in communist and bull as in... I'm sure you can figure it out. So, as you're aware, I've been away a couple of weeks. And I have to admit, I'd never heard of this ship. This ship, I'll have a stab at pronouncing the name, the Novorossiysk, being played for us today by Norris Plays in this Tier 6 domination battle here on the Haven map. One carrier on each side. Oh, actually, no, this is a Tier 7 battle. Could be worse. I mean, the matchmaking isn't that bad. Yeah, there are a couple of Tier 7s and Norris is in the Tier 6, but this is a very, very good Tier 6, for reasons which we will go into in a moment. For reasons that surprised me when I discovered what they were, although it really shouldn't have. Again, for reasons that I'll go into in a moment. There's one carrier on each team, there's one submarine on each team, and the good news for the battleships is there's only one destroyer on each team. So, as far as the matchmaking is concerned, not actually terrible. And there are only 3 Tier 7s on each team. Norris's team have a Gneisenau, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is. They also have an Atlanta and a Ferruccio. The enemy team, in place of the Gneisenau, get a Leon, and their 2 Tier 7 cruisers are the Asturias and the Chumphon. So, what am I talking about when I say this is a very good ship? And I probably shouldn't have been surprised. Well, the thing that you have to bear in mind about Russian and Soviet battleships in particular in this game is that if they're any good, they either never existed or they're not Russian. And I have to admit, I had technically never heard of the Novorossiysk. This was the first time, I didn't even realise it was in the game. Although at the same time, I kind of had heard about it. I just didn't realise that when it entered Soviet service, this ship was renamed the Novorossiysk. Because this is not a Russian ship. This is an Italian battleship. It's a very, very good Italian battleship. In fact, there's one of them on Norris's team. This is the Julio Cesare, except Russian, and at Tier 6. Let's not forget the Julio Cesare was the extremely good premium Tier 5 Italian battleship that prompted something of a scandal when Wargaming decided they wanted to start messing around with the stats of premium ships that they'd been entirely happy to sell to us because they'd sold us ships that were a bit too good. With the Julio Cesare being the poster child of that let's nerf the premiums movement, which didn't go down very well. I mean, which is understandable. You know, once you paid money for something, they'd better not mess around with it, and so it never happened. But the fact that this is a Tier 6 and still performs well gives you some idea of just how good the Julio Cesare was at Tier 5, and still is. So what's it doing under a Russian flag? What fresh bullshit is this? Well, this is where I had actually heard of it. Because, as you know, Italy entered World War II on the side of the Axis powers. And then in 1943, they said, actually, no, we don't like this much anymore. Sorry, Germany, we're going to switch sides. And they became co-belligerents with the Allied powers. That didn't matter to our good friend Joseph Stalin, however, who, the second Italy left Germany behind, immediately started demanding war reparations from the Italians. In particular, he had his eye on some of those Littorio-class Italian battleships. You might be thinking, well, what did Italy have to do with Russia? I mean, weren't the Italian troops mostly fighting in the North African desert and Greece and the Balkans? And, well, yeah, but they were actually Italian divisions fighting in the Battle of Stalingrad. So he did sort of have a claim, and he wasn't going to take no for an answer. The problem was, with Italy switching sides and now fighting on our side, it didn't make an awful lot of sense to start stripping their military of all their good stuff, while at the same time expecting them to fight for you. So a compromise was reached, and rather than handing over brand new Italian battleships, Britain said, look, you can have some of ours instead. And so HMS Royal Sovereign was rebranded I can't even pronounce the name of the city, but the city of Archangel, or whatever the Russian pronunciation is, that was the new name of the ship. And it was transferred to the Soviet Navy. Now, the Royal Sovereign were an old class of ships, the R-class battleships, but they were very heavily armed and armoured. They were very similar to the Queen Elizabeth class, like the Queen Elizabeth and the Warspite, except they didn't receive the extensive interwar modifications that the Queen Elizabeth class did to make them remain competitive. They were still very heavily armed with 8 15-inch guns and a lot of armour, but their power plants were weak. They could barely reach 20 knots, which made them ideal for convoy escort duties, but not an awful lot else. Anyway, Stalin agreed to accept the Royal Sovereign, and it was transferred to Soviet service. And then we asked for it back when the war ended, and Stalin kind of just put his hands over his ears and said, blah, 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 can't hear you, hoping that we'd forget about it and he would get to keep it, which we didn't. And eventually, in 1949, he grudgingly returned it to Britain, or what was left of it. And the only reason he agreed to send the thing back, well, there were actually two reasons. One, he'd finally gotten his Italian war reparations in the shape of this thing, the artist formerly known as the Julio Cesare, and now known as the Novorossiysk in Soviet service, and also he'd basically ruined the Royal Sovereign. It had spent 5 years in Soviet service, basically without any maintenance. It was a wreck. It could barely move under its own power. It was rusting apart. The guns wouldn't even turn in the turrets. They'd just seized up and rusted shut. There was even live ammunition that had been stored in the gun barrels for years and had rusted in place. It was only good for scrap. So these are all factors that make me deeply suspicious in this game of anything good in the Russian tech tree. Oh, hang on a second. Norris has got some shots out there at the enemy Chumfon, Tier 7 cruiser. Boom! Headshot! There's his first kill. But yes, I'm deeply suspicious of anything in the Soviet tech tree, any battleships in particular in the Soviet tech tree, that are good, because it's usually an indication, given how much Soviet battleships that existed sucked, that they either never actually existed, like the Sinop, the Vladivostok, the Sovietsky Soyuz, which were begun but never completed, the Kremlin, in which case Wargaming are free to make up any old shit they like about how the ship performs, or they did exist, but like this one, it's actually about as Russian as Neapolitan pizza, and after a couple of years in Russian service would have been about as seaworthy as Neapolitan pizza as well. Got to give the Soviet Navy some credit though, they did build some good cruisers, I'll give them that much, but yeah, battleships, not so much. Some of the destroyers were pretty good, but again, some of their good destroyers were actually Italian designs. And while they were perfectly good for operating in places like the Mediterranean, not so much in the North Atlantic and the Arctic Circle. You sometimes hear people asking the question, oh, hang on a second. Oh, baby, yes. Carrier citadels, best kind of citadels. But yeah, you sometimes hear people asking the question, well, hang on a second, what about the North Atlantic convoys? Why was Britain, and to a lesser degree the USA and the Royal Canadian Navy, shouldering the responsibility of escorting all of those North Atlantic convoys carrying war aid to Russia? I mean, the Russians are the ones that need this stuff. Why can't they provide convoy escorts? The simple reason was they couldn't. Russian destroyers just couldn't operate in the North Atlantic. They'd get swamped. The second the sea state rose to anything above what you might expect to have to deal with in the Mediterranean, which was most of the time, they were just in serious danger of capsizing. They couldn't handle that kind of conditions. So, yeah. And here we are. And hence the title of the video, Red Bull. You've got a Soviet, although it's actually Italian, battleship that isn't completely shit and actually existed. I'm calling foul here somewhere, and of course the reason is because it's about as Russian as Neapolitan pizza, which is why it's actually good. Norris just nailed the carrier, by the way. Well, it was about a minute ago. Obviously that's going to be a Huge relief to the rest of the team, in particular the lone destroyer, who has managed to stay alive thus far, unlike the majority of the rest of his team. Despite the losses, the team are not that far behind on points, because they've done well with the cap circles. They currently control 2, and that sole surviving... There he goes. Yeah. Was contesting the cap circle down in Delta, and despite the loss of the carrier, couldn't take the hint, with enemy ships closing in from all directions and wiping him out. Which means the enemy team, while they do now only control 1 cap circle, they've extended their lead with the kill on the destroyer, although the friendly carrier, the Ranger, has just managed to sink the enemy Mackinson. But they're still behind on points, and the enemy team are about to equalise the cap circles. There's only 5 of his teammates left against 7 enemies. Still, it's not too bad. They're not that far ahead. What's that New Mexico doing? Oh lordy, he's sailing straight into a crossfire. Oh, this isn't good. This is not good at all. I mean, you could argue, and you'd be right, that if the New Mexico were to turn around now and try to sail away, he's just too slow and he'd be exposing broadside to multiple ships in the process of doing it and would probably get paddled to within an inch of his life. But all that means is that he should have turned around at least a minute ago, because sailing into a crossfire like that, it's not doing him any favours. At best, he can maybe hope to take one of them with him, but he is absolutely doomed. Norris here trying to take advantage of the fact that they are all beating that New Mexico to death in order to get some shots out and at least try to inflict some damage and get some more kills before the New Mexico... Yeah, there he goes, and he didn't even manage to take anyone with him. Oh dear. This of course means that Norris is now public enemy number 1. The New Mexico's death wasn't 100% completely in vain, because he did keep resetting that cap circle down at Delta. But there's basically nothing there now to prevent the enemy team from taking it. And they are not far short of 200 points ahead, and they're about to equalise the cap circles. I think it's time to get the hell out of here. Fortunately, Norris is in a very... Oh, there's a kill here, surely. Come on, get the Leon. You'd think this would be a kill, and I'm pretty sure Norris thought this was going to be a kill, because he starts spreading the firepower around, thinking that his first 2 salvos were going to kill the Leon, and then he could switch the rest of the guns to the Koenig at the back. But it didn't kill the Leon. The Leon's starting to heal back up. Fortunately, the friendly carrier is on the job, and the Ranger finishes him off. This is allowing Norris to switch all of his firepower onto the Koenig, because he needs to get that guy killed, because he's now caught in a crossfire, as is the heavy cruiser with him. Fortunately, the Koenig... Ooh, enemy submarine. Oh, that's bad. That's kind of bad. Okay, he's got the Koenig. That's his 3rd kill. This gives him some options. He's obviously manoeuvring to avoid those torpedoes. He no longer has to worry about being caught in a crossfire between the enemy down to the south and the Leon and the Koenig that were off to the west. The presence of an enemy submarine, however, is complicating matters. He's eaten a couple of torpedoes there. Notice how good this submarine is, by the way. Oh, there's the enemy Asturias, another tier 7 cruiser. Shots out. Notice the depth charges aren't hitting anything. More on that in a moment. First, double Citadel, kill number 4. Deletes the Asturias from the map. He's probably going to want to take advantage of some of the islands here in order to not get hammered by all of those enemies. The problem, of course, is that's getting him closer and closer to the enemy submarine, but hey, better the devil you know. Again, note, despite what looked like pretty accurate depth charge placement, 0 depth charge hits on the submarine. The submarine player actually knows what he's doing. He's not just sitting in one spot. He's given his position away with a sonar ping, and then he's basically shooting and scooting. And I suspect what's happened, he's ducked around the corner of the island up ahead, and he's just waiting for his torpedoes to come off cooldown. Now, this is of course giving Norris a bit of breathing space. The caps are even, but the scores have basically flipped, with both teams now on the same number of kills, but since Norris's team have had 2 cap circles for the majority of the game, with the enemy team only having the 1, they're now nearly 200 points ahead. It's important they don't squander this lead. And there goes the carrier, and the enemy team are now flipping the cap circle at Charlie. So much for the nearly 200-point lead. There's now 3 of them against 4. Again, you know, it's not a huge disadvantage. It's only 1 kill ahead, and they are still slightly ahead on points, but now the enemy team are flipping the cap at Charlie. So unless somebody sinks something quick, and right now I have to say that Kirov over there is looking like a very likely candidate, the enemy team are going to start climbing ahead on points. That, yes, nice. Okay, good stuff. The Ferruccio took him out. They're now over 100 points ahead. And the Kirov was the one who was threatening the cap circle at Charlie, so they no longer need to worry about that. Norris has a beautiful broadside shot against the Fuso down to the south and scores a respectable amount of damage. Giving him the high caliber award, actually, with 140,000 damage done thus far, but no citadels, which is kind of surprising because, I mean, the Fuso, I like the Fuso, it's a good ship, it's got a lot of firepower, even though the guns are only 14-inch, it's got a lot of them, but it's not known for having the greatest and most effective armour scheme. And given the number of broadside shots and potential epic paddlings that the enemy Fusos have been giving to Norris, he hasn't managed to score a single citadel against any of them. There's the other enemy Fuso, and again, I mean, you couldn't really ask for much of a better target than that. Shots out from all 4 turrets. Oh, there's the enemy sub. Get those depth charges away. Damage on the enemy Fuso. I mean, you know, they're penetrations, but no citadels. Both teams still have 3 ships remaining. Both teams have 2 of the cap circles. Norris's team do have that fairly slim, roughly 100-point lead. Again, another beautiful potential broadside paddling against the Fuso, who takes a large chunk of damage there from torpedoes, but not... I mean, 9,000 isn't nothing. But it's kind of disappointing given the perfect firing angles that he's got against these enemy ships. Now notice, he's not actually trying to depth charge an enemy submarine here. He's looking for the anti-aircraft tracer, letting him know where that enemy Fuso is. He's right around this corner. There's the submarine. And the submarine can damage him, but it's not going to one-shot him, which is what the Fuso will do if he comes around this corner broadside on in front of him. So depth charges away now that he actually knows where the submarine is, and he's angling against the Fuso. There it is. Now he still took a large chunk of damage there, but if he'd sailed out broadside on in front of that Fuso, those 10 14-inch guns would have ruined him. There's the Kraken Unleashed. The depth charges finally hit something. 2 enemy ships left, both Fusos. The other one is, however, what we refer to as somebody else's problem. And is probably, hopefully, about to die very soon, leaving this one pretty much all to Norris. But you can see the gears turning in Norris's head here, because you remember what happened earlier when he thought he'd killed the Leon and used his rear turrets to shoot at the Koenig instead. And while he's not giving broadside to the Fuso in front of him, he is giving broadside to the one over there. So I think very wisely he decided, let's just make sure that one dies before I come to regret it. And there's kill number 6, leaving just that one Fuso ahead of him. At this point, I mean, he could just ram him. Yeah, it would have cost him his ship, but with 2 surviving ships left on his team, and that being the last enemy, a ram would do. And while the Novorossiysk does have the speed advantage over the Fuso by something like 7 or 8 knots, the team are up to 934 points, and he might not actually have the time to catch up to him. Norris is going to win anyway. He doesn't need to do anything stupid or risky here. The Fuso, however, does, which explains why he turns to give, and again, no citadels, turns to almost give a flat broadside, because to keep himself in the game, the Fuso needs a kill. And then, given the point situation, he's going to need another 2 kills very, very quickly. So it's understandable that the Fuso turns around to give full broadside because he does need to get all of his guns firing. But that one salvo was, well, his one opportunity to prolong the inevitable. Still no citadels, by the way. But 7 kills, and he wasn't even top tier in this suspiciously good Soviet battleship. Norris plays doing exceptionally well in a Soviet battleship that did actually exist and didn't completely suck, because in reality it was about as Soviet as Gino de Campo. Well done, Norris. Thanks for sending it in. Everyone else, hope you all enjoyed it. Hope you're all having a great day, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.